I mean, it's down to the message, isn't it? Like you said, the audio itself, the quality, you have to have your basic quality there, but it's what it's delivering is what matters. It's the message, the voice, and that all comes down to, who it is you're talking to, the message that you're giving, the problem you're solving for them. Like, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Like, people are actually, we're all a bit selfish. We all want to make sure that we're getting the best use of our time. So to get somebody to listen to 30 minutes or an hour of audio, you have to tell them what's in it for them.
That was the voice of Colin Gray. Colin's a podcaster, international speaker, PhD, and founder of The Podcast Host and Alitu. Colin started out in astrophysics before realizing how much math you had to do. Turns out podcasting has less math and more interesting puzzles. True. Now he's been in podcasting for 12 years and aims to help everyone to get their voice heard. So this talk was so interesting. We touched on a lot of actionable tips that I think people can turn around and use tomorrow on their podcast. And if you've ever looked up guides on starting podcasts or anything to do with podcast education, I'm willing to bet that you've come across The Podcast Host already. It's the number one player in the podcast education space. It kind of felt like talking to a celebrity today because we have been listening to Colin and his co-host Matthew on their podcast, Podcraft, for years. He was a huge reason why I started Podigy the way I did and took the company where I did. And so, yeah, I just think this is a great episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm really good, thanks, actually. Yeah, how about you guys?
Good.
Really good.
Thank you. Really excited.
Yeah, to give a brief, a very brief little background, when I started Podigy about 5 years ago, Colin's podcast and his website, The Podcast Host, and his podcast, Podcraft, which we'll link below, helped me immensely. It was just like a plethora of free information on podcasting and everything. I was taking notes. I bought books, and I would contribute probably like 80% of my first kind of knowledge intake from all of Colin's content. And I think The Podcast Host is the number one player in the podcast education space, right?
Oh yeah, I would say that. You always come up.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It's so good to know. It's always amazing to hear people who have actually used our content to actually create podcasts. Never mind create a whole podcast company. So yeah,
right?
Really great to hear that. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's you do great stuff, and you're a great teacher, and then also your co-host Matthew is like, I love listening to you guys, and we'll totally link all that stuff below. I also love your guys' accents. Yeah, it's all Matthew. Yeah, I love your accents too. I really, they're so cool.
It's funny. It's not we always, I mean, you guys will do the same, but when you're talking to new podcasters, you always try and figure out, what's your uniqueness? What can stand out? And certainly it's less unique these days, but when we started, like close to 10 years ago, I think we were the only Scottish people teaching podcasting. So,
it's so funny.
Lead in, use what you've got.
Yeah, of course.
That's so cool.
That's great.
When I first started listening to it, my English wasn't that good because I'm Italian, and
okay.
I had to really focus at first. I was like,
she has troubles with accents.
My English was not good.
Well, it's good that we don't record our podcast and, our Friday night drinks after work. Our accents tend to get a little bit stronger at that point. So we'll try and avoid that. Just keep it on.
Man. Yeah, of course. So people heard your bio, and you've done like a lot of speaking and stuff, and everything is kind of centered around the Podcast Host and also Alitu. And so you don't have to go into too much detail because it'll all be linked. But what is the backstory of you and podcasting? How did you start into this world?
Yeah, I was working as a lecturer. So I was in education. That's kind of my background, is teaching. So I was working at a university in Edinburgh, and we were I taught how to use technology to teach people more effectively. And one of the fancy new techs that came along in 2004 or 2005 it started, but I think I discovered it in 2007-ish. I was asked to look at podcasting by my boss, actually. So I was like, oh, they're podcasting. So I went off and tried to find some. And I fell in love with the medium really over, a few months. Just that, the intimacy that you feel, like that kind of one-to-one feeling of podcasting compared with the in-depth content as well, how much you can learn from it, the fact that you can do it all in the background. So it makes like an hour walk feel like it's productive, never mind just the exercise. That's just all of those things came together to really, love the medium. And then from there, it was just started writing about it, really. Just everything that I was learning, I wrote on the podcast host. And I think it was partly a, right time, right place that kind of started to gain a fair bit of traction. And the story went from there, really. Went through all the iterations to where we are now, which is really the education side of things on the podcast host and the software to help people actually do it on Alitu.
Yeah. So this has been a long time coming then. You've been at this for a long time. That's really cool.
Yeah, a few years.
Yeah, totally.
Super
cool.
Before
long before it gained serious popularity.
Yeah, there was, I still remember the days of copying files, like audio files from my computer via USB cable onto like a USB stick, what do you call it, MP3 player, essentially, a dedicated MP3 player, even before iPods and stuff like that. It was crazy.
Holy.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to listen now, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, very cool. So one of the things that I like to do on our show is try to keep things like actionable. There's a lot of podcasts that are, kind of more conceptual, but I do like to kind of give people something that they can walk away with, sort of like what you guys do with your show. And so one of the things that I did was I looked through a bunch of your podcast episodes on the titles and things. Lots of them I had already heard. Some of them I hadn't listened to yet. And I just thought that there's a lot of really great questions in there. And I know that each of them is like a whole episode. And so, like 45-minute episode, but it'd be cool to just get sort of like a brief summary on a few things. And so I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask is, when you go to launch a new show, and I'm not actually sure if you help people launch shows. I'm sure that you do, but I'm sure you've launched tons and tons of podcasts. When you go to launch a new show now in 2023, what are a few of the main things that you need to keep in mind, or like actionable tips for launching a new podcast?
Do you know, I think it's funny how little has actually changed over the last 5-10 years around that, because the tech has changed, like mics, software, that kind of stuff. Some of that's changed, but even though so many people, I'm sure you guys see it as well, like people overvalue that so much. They think like it matters so much what host you choose, what microphone you choose, all that kind of stuff. They think that's what makes a success of a podcast, but it's nothing to do with that, really. As long as you've got that kind of base level of quality, you've got like a decent USB mic that you just plug into your computer. As long as you've got that, everything else is kind of just, try and automate as much as you can. And really what it comes down to is that strategy up front. Like it's that kind of, I often call it maybe the problem, solution, uniqueness triad. Yeah,
it's a great
so
way
it's
to
all
put
around
it.
that. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that still matters. I mean, is it worth going into that a little bit?
Well, absolutely. Like, so what you're essentially saying is that is what I've kind of been thinking and saying for a few years now, which is that as an audio production company, the audio is actually quite insignificant. It's the amount of podcasts that I've listened to with the worst audio quality you could imagine, recorded from like some live talk, but you just bear with it because the message is so intensely powerful. So you're kind of talking about it more as almost like a marketing approach, like thinking of it as a product and as a business, and the actual like purpose behind it is way more important than the technical pieces or different things like that, right?
I mean, it's down to the message, isn't it? Like you said, the audio itself, the quality, you have to have your basic quality there, but it's what it's delivering is what matters. It's the message, the voice, and that all comes down to, who it is you're talking to, the message that you're giving, the problem you're solving for them. Like, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Like people are actually, we're all a bit selfish. We all want to make sure that we're getting the best use of our time. So to get somebody to listen to 30 minutes or an hour of audio, you have to tell them what's in it for them. And it can be as basic as entertainment. But actually, I mean, you guys work with coaches. Like, for them, it's down to, how can they get better at coaching? How can they get more clients? All that kind of stuff. So it's about solving those problems for them, really, and try and make the tech invisible. I mean, that was kind of the whole principle behind us building Alitu, actually, is to make some parts of that tech, just try and make it as invisible as we can so that people can concentrate on what they do best, which is deliver their message, teach their expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that. That's very true.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is, well, we briefly spoke about this before we hopped on this podcast, but a lot of it is that very cliche word niching. And I think people can niche up like way more than they could ever possibly imagine, focusing on one group of underserved people and say, we don't have a podcast for everybody, but you come over here. We got something for you specifically. And so do you want to touch on that briefly? You said that you're really interested in that recently for the podcast host as well and all that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've always just talked about podcasting, really, just general podcasting, and tried to answer every question in the whole industry of podcasting. Right. But more recently, it's a good thing and a bad thing. I think the industry's changed a bit in the last few years, and it's become much more. The good thing is it's expanded. It's become much more professional. It's there's more money coming into podcasting. There's more big companies, more corporations, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that all is all good for the industry in most ways, but one of the downsides is that it does mean it fragments a little bit. Suddenly you have these huge companies like Spotify and YouTube coming in as well, and all these different companies that are massive and coming in and sort of making waves and changing things. And it kind of makes the other side of it, the independent podcaster, a bit more, it can make them feel a little bit kind of put aside sometimes, I think. And that's kind of where we've ended up niching down a lot, in that we've always been for independent podcasters, really. We teach the independent, the person in their basement talking about their gaming or their knitting or whatever kind of hobby they have. Or it's people like yourselves, like coaches that, they're building a personal brand and they're doing it on their own, and it's all built on their own reputation. Yeah. That's the kind of people that really suit the kind of teaching that we put out there. We've been kind of niching down on that content and doing much more in there. And our community, for example, is now the IndiePod community, and we've done a census on to find out what independent podcasters really want compared to bigger companies or in-house podcasters or stuff like that. So that's been really interesting, actually. It's been good fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's just a story that I want to briefly share, which I've shared a few times, but I want to tell you. Do you know Fatima Zaidi? Do you know who that is?
No, I haven't heard the name. No.
She owns Quill Podcasting, or Quill Inc.
Oh yeah, of course. I know the company. Yeah.
Yeah, the company. Yes, of course. So we brought Fatima on,
co-host.
Yeah, which is a hosting platform. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she told us a story about a guy who came to her wanting to start a podcast about open banking, and she says,
in a small country.
Yeah, okay, like even more niche than that, right?
Yeah.
And she says, nobody's going to listen to a podcast about open banking. He goes, no, I really think that we should start this podcast. And after a bit of back and forth, finally she agreed. It's the number one podcast that Quill has ever produced. So
really?
Because they were not, that was a group of people and an interest that was wildly underserved.
Yeah.
And I think like the more that we learn about marketing, because we are focusing on growing our company and our brand, and I think the biggest thing that we've realized is that being able to solve problems for a specific group of people is way more important than being able to do what everybody else is doing to everybody. And I mean, maybe that sounds very obvious for a lot of people. And obviously coaches are like good coaches who have a good business behind their practice. They know this thing, right? Like they niche down at the start right away. And so I think a lot of them already understand that. But yeah, okay. So
I think, sorry, just jump in there. I think the really cool thing about that as well is that particularly the niching down, a big power of podcasting is the fact that you can build such a connection with your audience, can't you? Like people feel like they get to know you and they're your friend, or it's the trust and the credibility that you build with people. So somebody like a coach, I mean, like what would you say like an average coach charges the people that you work with? Like what would they charge a client?
Well, we're trying to get coaches who have programs that can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000 to $25,000 to be part of their program.
Perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, how many people do you need to work with to make a really good living at that stage?
Right?
Like what, 20, 30, 40? Yeah, exactly. Max.
Yeah, max, yes.
Yeah. So you go super niche, super tight, and you might end up with only 100, 200 listeners. I say only, I mean, that's a good achievement to make amazing, it to even. Yeah. But with the power of podcasting, that kind of trust, that intimacy, that, that kind of friendship almost that you develop with your listeners, you could convert like a quarter, a half of those people into customers. So it's so cool that you can kind of... Yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that in another medium. Absolutely.
No, you can't.
But
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Celine, go for it.
I do understand though that it makes people nervous to niche down.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know from our business, like it does make me a little bit nervous at first, and then I'm like, no, it's fine because I know all of that. But at first, like it makes me a little bit anxious for a sec. Yeah. So I understand people when they don't want to do it. Yeah. I really get it, but it's actually really like it is better.
Yeah, everyone fights it. Everyone fights it. But as soon as you kind of demonstrate how much more likely it is that people are going to listen.
Yes.
So you might only have a target market of 1,000, 10,000 people, but because you're so specific with the problems and who should listen, all of them, it's a no-brainer for them to listen if you're doing it well. So
and man, is it ever a breath of fresh air to have a specific person that you're speaking to, because otherwise it's like, oh, I got to make that. Oh, I got to make that. No, I have to go and talk about this for that type of person, but that's not going to be that. So then I got to go make that. And it's just like, no, it's complete silence. Coaches, this is what we're doing. Like, block everything else out.
Clarity.
Let's just go for it. Yeah. So much clarity, right? And that was the biggest thing that happened for us. And it's sort of backwards. You almost imagine, well, how do I grow the biggest business? Well, serve the biggest amount of people. And it's like, actually, serve a small amount of people, but really well. That will grow it, right? And like you said, we don't need very many clients at all. We in order for our business to be perfect, it's actually a small number, and that's really cool because, well, even coaching now is a huge market, industry because I mean, even you're a coach, right? Like we're coaches doing this. If you're an online educator with some type of personal brand, then I think you could label yourself as a coach, and that's where our business coach, who helps coaches, he went even deeper, and now he only helps, health-based entrepreneurs in the coaching world, right? Or like some people in his program, he helps people design high-ticket offers, and some people in his program only work with a, group of women with a specific type of rare illness, right? And that may only be like a handful of people, but also, I think the other thing is that you'll gravitate towards helping the people where it's most meaningful for you. So if you are somebody who's experienced that illness yourself, well, then you know firsthand that you have something that you can connect with an audience on in that way, or that can be applied to a lot of things. I think people go through something, totally have a life change, realize that they learned a lot and that they don't want other people to struggle the way they did, and then that's their life now at that point. That story, you see that story a lot of people doing complete life shifts.
Yeah. No, it's great. And if you can help with that life shift, there's nothing more satisfying than actually helping somebody enable that. It's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. So why don't we get into the next thing here, which is another one of your podcast episodes. And I figure we should link your episodes for each part in the show notes, right, Celine? So that we can,
that's a great idea.
You'll go more into depth in those. I actually listened to this one while I was working out. Little podcast plug there. You can listen while you're working out. She listens to music. I listen to podcasts. So
I don't like doing that.
Some type of nerd.
Yeah.
Okay, but how can people measure downloads? Because in your episode, you were talking about how different hosts have different ways of qualifying listeners and downloads and different filters, and then there's bots that can get involved. So do downloads really mean your listener numbers?
Yeah, it's really tricky. And as we kind of, we had to dive into this pretty deep when we started building hosting into Alitu as well. It's so crazy how it changes, because your download is essentially just somebody is grabbing the file off the web. And I mean, what apps do you guys use to listen to podcasts out of interest?
Spotify, 100%.
Your Spotify?
Yeah.
What about you,
Apple.
Celine? Apple, yeah. So both of them. Spotify is a bit of a funny one, actually. It works a little bit different. It changes the downloads even more. So I'll talk about that in a sec. But like Apple Pods, you can set it up to download the episodes automatically, can't you? So Celine, you're subscribed to what, 10, 15, 20 shows?
Yeah, and they all
do you
download.
Listen to? Yeah, do you listen to all the episodes? No. So that's the thing. Like, it'll download every single one of those episodes and give you a download credit for each one. But it doesn't mean that somebody's listened, which is a really tricky thing. And this is something people are really trying to sort in the industry. It's one of the biggest problems just now, is how do you get real listener numbers? Apple actually give you, so one way you can get a measure on this is the Apple Podcast Connect, they call it, is the kind of Apple dashboard. So when you submit your podcast to Apple, they'll list it in the Apple Podcast directory, and then you can go into Apple Podcast Connect and look at the trends there, and you can actually see how much people have listened through. Yeah. And it's one of the only platforms that allows that. And Apple Podcast, luckily enough, has a fair bit of volume, anything from maybe a quarter to a third of listens overall. So that's a lot of people listening. So it's a good sort of indication of the trends. That's really cool. But yeah, a download doesn't quite count for a listen in many cases. And yeah, that's even going into all of the bots and all that kind of stuff. Like there's so much there's so much rubbish.
You essentially said that like some platforms have better filters to filter bots and some have less. And so you'd mentioned that somebody can go from having 150 downloads an episode to having like 50 just after they switched platforms and then think that, something went wrong.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because it's not even sort of malicious ones in many ways. It's bots or automations that are just checking that the episode is there, checking that there's a new episode. They're like, oh, is there a file there? Right, okay, we can deliver this to the user.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
So there's loads of reasons why people do it, but that still mean that we as hosts have to filter it out because it doesn't count as even a download, never mind a listen, because it's only like a tiny proportion of the file. So
yeah. So what I often hear is people say, oh, the download doesn't mean the listen. So they think that the listens are more than the downloads because not everybody downloads, right?
No,
it's also true. But I think, but then I don't know why nobody has ever talked about this. I have never heard a podcast episode about the topic, and I loved that episode of you guys. Loved it.
Yes.
And
we both did.
I feel kind of silly for not thinking about it myself, because if you think about any other platform, like even Instagram, people were buying their followers. Why wouldn't it happen in podcasting, right? And so I was like, damn, there's a whole, this is a whole thing.
But wait, you made a good point. You said, I have never downloaded a podcast episode in my life. I listen to everything live on the go. It uses up my data. I have tons of data. I just want it when I want it, and I don't want any questions about it.
so that still counts as a download, yeah. So it's
still
just
counts?
Yeah, because you're still downloading the file. So you're still downloading the data. It's just that you call it, because it's on the go one, you call it a stream, but it's still download. It's just downloading it over, live, essentially. So yeah, that still counts.
Good to know.
Man, can we cut that
did not
out? How can
know
I
that.
own a podcast company and not know that?
Yeah, I had no idea. But I had no idea about the bots.
No, that's the thing. It's all of this stuff is really quite technical. It's not obvious. It's not intuitive at all. So don't feel silly about that at all.
I do feel a little bit, but there's like you said, there's so many pieces of this industry, of any industry, and becoming an expert on every single thing is it's impossible, but this is why we have these conversations. I'm really, really happy we brought you on.
Cool.
Yeah.
We've been bringing on, we have two guests that we bring on now, two types of guests. One is the coach / podcaster to talk about insights of how they built the platform that they did and how it's helped their coaching practice.
Oh, yeah,
and
cool.
two, podcast industry people, because we love that. Like, we just love that. Absolutely adore that.
Because I feel like today I could literally ask you anything and you would know the answer. And that's so cool.
Totally. It's crazy.
Well, I appreciate you thinking that, but it's probably not true.
No, I think that's true. I really do.
Yeah, of course.
No, well, I didn't know the answer to that necessarily a year ago. That's only like you're learning in the last year since we've had to dive into the hosting.
Well, never heard about that.
Yep. So I was going to ask, okay, how do you personally prepare with an interview? Maybe you don't have to go too much into depth, but before hopping on a call with somebody, what do you recommend doing?
Yeah, good question. And you mentioned, you hinted at before we got on the call here, it's probably not what we did.
Yeah,
which is true.
Yeah.
You bet.
We usually do it differently, though. I don't know if
we do. We just had a bit of a...
Oh, no, that was not a dig at you guys at all. It was more what I should have done, actually, in terms of preparing for them. But it's when, I think when you're... So anyway, let's go into what I think is a good idea. The good idea is actually like the way to, what's your goal as a person that goes on a show like this, like I'm on your show? Yeah. The goal is to give as much value as you can so that your listeners think that I'm great and then want to follow up on the stuff that I have done potentially. Yeah. So the whole point is that I want to teach them something. I want to make it something different. I want to make it different from every other how to start a podcast episode. And the best way to do that, I think, which a lot of people miss out on, is actually doing a bit of prep themselves and sending through some notes.
Oh, like I often recommend sending notes.
Yeah, okay. I think the guest, it's your onus as the guest, I think, to actually make sure that episode is going to be great. And a big part of the way you can do that is make sure that you tell the host. So I tell you, what do I think differently about this industry or this topic, or how do I teach this differently? Like, what are my unique views on this? Mm-hmm. So I'll often send through maybe 3 to 5 bullet points of here's 3 to 5 things that I like to teach that I know always go down well with audiences like yours. And I know that not many other people talk about.
Sure,
because the trouble is, if you don't take that move, if you don't take that effort, then quite often the person that's interviewing, and this is partly the reason why I don't do it with you guys, because quite often the person interviewing you is not an expert in your area. Whereas you guys know podcasting, so that's fine. So you know the kind of interesting things to ask.
Yes.
But on a lot of shows you go on, they won't know what to ask you because it's not their expertise. They'll just ask you the bog standard basic stuff that everyone asks about podcasting on every other show.
I see what you're saying.
Do you get me? So it's like, it's your job as the expert in that area, I think, to make sure that host unearths, the interesting parts, the unique parts, the really compelling parts. And you as the expert as well, you're the one that knows the stuff that really kind of gets people going, the thing that's really a light bulb moment for that area. Like your coaches that come on, every one of them will know like 2 or 3 things that they teach that really makes people's eyes go, this is something that's like really blows their mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
So as the guest, it's your job, I think, to reach out and make sure that way is paved so that the person can interview well. And that can even include, actually, I think, like having 2 or 3 stories that you have offhand that you say to them, look, here's a couple of stories that I have that are maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes long that always go down well. It always kind of gets a little light bulb moment as well. So here's a prompt question that you can ask me at some point during the interview that means that I can launch into this story in a really normal, natural way.
So let me ask you then.
Yeah.
So then let's say that you are a more proactive host, organizational kind of minded. You could just then send like a Google intake form with those prompts, but from the other end, do you have any stories that you like talking about? Are there prompt questions that we can ask you for those stories, or do you have unique insights, 2 to 3 unique insights that will make this episode different from every other podcast discussion episode or of that type of thing, right? Because we have our clients use a template of a Google intake form that we use that we actually didn't send you, which was we're working with a new virtual assistant and we're having just some growing pains that she just started.
Sure.
So, but yeah, so maybe you could have an intake form that has those things, and then you hop on and you just pull it up on your screen, and then you know exactly what you're doing and you feel more calm and ready for your interview, not just like, hopping into it type thing.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? You either have to spend, in fact, you probably need to do both. I was going to say you either have to spend, 10, 15, 20 minutes listening to some clips from interviews you've done before or reading up on them so that you can really kind of tailor those interview questions. Yeah. Or you can, you can actually do that intake form as well to really get their opinions on what to cover. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more. People always think of interviews as kind of the easy way to create content. But it always leads to a really average show. Like interviews are really easy to do in an easy way, but it ends up with crappy content, basically.
Oh, yeah.
To counter that, then, in your words, what do you have to do to not make it a every day, every show?
Yeah, that's it. It's to pull out those insights. It's to pull out those unique things. It's to make it so that the person that you bring on actually says something that they've never said before.
Yeah, exactly.
Something.
And I feel like
that.
Sorry. I totally cut you off. I was going to say, with you, we've listened to you so many times that it's easier, I think.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, but I really have to say something now. So, what are 3 things that you think nobody talks about in the podcasting industry? I just want to know, because I'm sure you know something that nobody talks about.
Well, I mean... Do you mean because people are avoiding it because it's a kind of secret subject?
Can be anything. Can be anything.
Underrated or
just something that.
What are your unique? Because we should have done that before.
Curious.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, one of the things that I bang on about, and I still don't hear enough people talking about it, is the idea of using seasons in podcasting.
Yeah, I love that you got to that. Yeah.
Other people do. It's not totally unique, but it's I still think it's such an undervalued and such an underused method to create consistency in podcasting, because you're so much kind of more planning ahead and you can batch process so much more. But it's also actually a real boon for your listeners as well, because if you put together a season's worth of content, you take a subject, you split it into 8 or 10 or 12 episodes. And every one of those episodes links together. One episode leads to the next. It's building episode to episode. Yeah. As opposed to your average podcast, which talks about something different every single episode, from beginner to expert. I sometimes liken it to, if you turned up at school one day, you signed up for a physics course, and the first day you've got basic addition, and then you've got, cosmology, and then you've got just adding up again, and then you've got general relativity. It's jumping around in levels and subjects and stuff. It's just not how people learn or develop.
Very true.
So, that's very true.
Yeah. So thinking of it as a season, you drag your listener through so much more compellingly, so they listen to more episodes. Mm-hmm. You give them more value because they're learning more effectively as well. And all of that turns them into more loyal, more long-term listeners.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, it helps the podcaster and the listener equally, I think.
Yeah, and I was a teacher as well. I was a teacher in elementary school, but still a teacher
in Italy.
And that's funny, right? We're trying to teach people something, but it's actually completely all over the place.
Disorganized.
Nobody would ever do that. Why would you do that?
Yeah, and you can never go back. It's so hard for a listener to come along and find a show with 100 episodes and think, right, where do I start?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to listen to 100 episodes. But there's no kind of structure here, so I can't really dive in at any point. But if you have it organized into seasons, you've got maybe 7 or 8 seasons rather than 100 episodes. Each of those 7 or 8 seasons covers one subject, which, if you've done your job right, is one of their biggest pains, because it's it's your audience. Every season should be solving one big pain, so they can jump in so much more easily.
I was talking with a client yesterday. I was actually out playing spike ball on the beach with one of our clients who's also our business coach. And he was saying to me, oh, I saw this thing where there was a 12 episode season that some podcaster had sort of lined up. And it was 12 different guests who were quite, large name guests, because this person was quite well established within their industry. And he said, they just put a post up with all the pictures and names, and sort of were building up or generating some kind of excitement or hype for the season ahead. And I thought, that's a great idea. You could treat your podcast more like a structured, almost like a TV series or something.
Yeah.
And so what do you think about that? I mean, planning, 8 guests ahead, having everything scheduled so that it works out that way, and kind of advertising a season and generating excitement for that beforehand. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the other benefits of it. Absolutely. The fact that the planning side of things, like a lot of the pains in podcasting, or one of the biggest pains in podcasting, is turning up on that Monday morning and thinking, right, what am I going to talk about this week?
Oh,
like, what are we going to, I need to think of a topic here.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Whereas if you're taking a seasons-based approach, you sit down for maybe 30 minutes, one day, and you think, right, what's the next big topic I'm going to tackle? You take a question that your clients, your students, your whatever it is asking, and then you break it down. You think, like for us, maybe it's podcasting equipment. Like, how do you choose your podcasting equipment? So I start thinking, right, I've got microphones, I've got mixers, I've got software, I've got, all sorts of other things. And then I think, right, can I break this down any more? Microphones, nah, I could do dynamic condenser, but nah, that's probably all one. Software though, I could do recording and editing separately. So there's split them in two. And you end up with this plan for 8, 10, 12 episodes, whatever it might be, that you have ahead of time. Then you can put some flesh in those bones. Like you can kind of say for every episode, maybe make 5, 10 bullet points. Yeah. And suddenly, after 30 minutes worth of work, you've got a plan for 3 months worth of content. Yeah. So you just sit down on the Monday morning, instead of thinking, oh, what's my topic? You've got this plan in front of you, and you just sit down and record it. It's so much better, so much easier. So yeah, it makes that kind of much more, so the other part of it, just what you mentioned there, Justin, was around the planning ahead. So once you've done that, you can then go out and you can find a guest for everyone. You can then go and record it. Right. You can record them all if you like. And during your season break, maybe it's a month or 2, and then you can promote it all really effectively.
Yeah.
And equally post as well. Yeah, cool. Well, even after that as well, like I think a big thing that podcasters don't do well enough is, try and promote their old content. It's all about the current episode, your most recent episode. But if you've got seasons, you've got this much there's something about them being bigger, chunkier pieces of content.
Yeah,
that makes it worthwhile.
They have more, they're like more respected that way. They just feel more substantial in some way.
Yes. So you can kind of like 6 months down the line, you can say, oh, remember that we once did a season about podcast equipment. It covers everything you need to know about choosing your equipment. Yeah. And you can put out some clips about it, so you can go back and promote it again. So
and even on top of that, there's the whole thing of, if you are running a business and you're trying to save yourself time and you're always answering the same questions over and over again, same 20 questions, what's this, and you're doing the same emails and all these things, I think that there's a huge potential to just send a podcast episode with a timestamp on when that thing was discussed, or just send the whole episode, and you don't even have to send it if you have a VA, and they can then answer your clients' questions with your voice by sending the podcast episode. So it's like outsourcing your troubleshooting without actually outsourcing it, because it's still you. So there's another added benefit of doing a season-based approach, because you can better organize everything, and like you said, I think it really allows you to go kind of deeper into certain topics rather than equipment as one topic. Okay, let's touch on everything, or equipment, boom, 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 and then you've got a plan ahead of you, and I love that.
And that's really key as well. Like, your listeners want the detail. They don't want you to skim over. Like sometimes you have a fear, you talk about a topic and you think, well, I can't just cover microphones. I want to cover all the equipment. But instead, you just go really deep. That's what you want to cover. You want to cover the whole thing, from back to front. Yeah,
that's true. Because if I'm looking to buy something new, I will not watch an overall video, but I will, or listen to a podcast, but I will listen to something that's really specific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something really cool about you were talking about repurposing earlier on as well. You guys do that really well. I mean, a season is something that can be really nicely repurposed because of the chunkiness of it. Yeah. Like, you can take 10 episodes and you can turn that into a little, audiobook that you stitch together and do a little bit of production around it, and then it's a download. And it's repurposed for, we don't do this so much anymore because we've kind of, I just don't have them listed anymore, but people used to find it really valuable, even if we just took, 12 of our blog posts and stitched them into an ebook, and they would actually pay like $1 or $2 or something, more than that, to be honest, $10 we'd sell that for sometimes, because people like the convenience of it turned into something that's just really easily, easily consumed, or even it's just, we've taken the time to collate a set of things together for them. So there's something about that. Like seasons are like that. You're collating the information for you. You can then turn it into an ebook, turn it into a course, turn it into an audiobook. There's all sorts of stuff you can do.
And
with
you're
it.
learning as you're researching and talking, and you are also compiling a bunch of information that'll really prove to everybody who looks at you online that you are an expert. Because how could you not be an expert talking an hour about microphones? Well, if you weren't an expert before, then you probably were after doing the research for the podcast episode. So, so we'll sort of wind it down with one more question, which is sort of more of a conceptual question. A lot of these were kind of just actionable tips, but I would really like to hear if you think that there are any paradigm shifts, sort of changes that are approaching in the near future, maybe to do with AI or some type of new technology, podcast technology, who knows? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of things in my mind at the moment. One is around AI, certainly. One is around video in podcasting as well. I think to do the video one first, I think there's been a big kind of growth in hype around video in the last couple of years.
Yes.
YouTube has come into podcasting more as well. And there's more tools, many more tools, a lot more money come into that video side of it as well. There's something, I don't know, it's always troubled me a bit in that podcasting kind of grew up around that kind of intimacy, the sharing your message, all of that stuff, a lot of which I think is lost by the video side of things. And also just the simple fact that video does work really well for some shows, for sure. Like some shows make it work really well, but the ones that make it work really well and do really well with it are the ones that actually put a lot more effort into the production value. Yeah. They've got a couple of cameras or they've got a background and great lighting and they think about the visuals, and it is visual first, which is not like most of the podcasts. Like the three of us are just sitting here looking at, webcam visuals, which are fine, but they're not like compelling for an hour to watch. No,
not to actually watch. No, you're very right about that. That's why I think like I will never watch a full podcast. I like the clips, but I will never watch the whole thing. I will always still listen. I love the listening medium. That's
I don't think I've ever watched a podcast.
Me neither.
But
no.
and saying that, which is really interesting, I know that podcast is like the number one medium that gets like listened through the most. Compared to other things.
Like
and we just started uploading our podcast to YouTube, and we haven't done any promotion on it or anything, and we get like 15 views or something like that, 20 views, like nothing. But the drop-off rate is so short. Like they drop off after 4 minutes.
Almost immediately,
Absolutely. I'm like, wow, it's barely hit the intro. But this is like, right? This goes to show that like the podcasting itself, like just the audio works so much better because I will listen while I'm like walking or doing something.
You can't watch while you're doing something.
Exactly.
Usually.
So
that's it. It worries me because I think the real value of the podcasting medium is that people can get their message out, they can teach, they can inspire, they can motivate really, really easily. It's so simple to get behind a mic. You can have a script in front of you. You don't have to worry about your hair and your lights and all that kind of stuff. You can just speak, and it's just so simple.
So simple,
that's very
easy.
True.
And I think the hype, the push, and I've seen this actually. It's not I think I've seen this with many podcasters that just haven't started because they feel that pressure to be adding video in. And it's not even only the confidence side of things, like the look and the not being able to rely on a script and all that kind of stuff. It's even just all the extra work around being able to
much extra work,
of course,
repurpose to different platforms and pick out the video clips and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's going to be a bit of a backlash against that, and people will be more honest about the fact that video just didn't work, actually. We're growing our audio, but the video just didn't grow anything at all. And there'll, of course, be people that make it work. There always will be, and that's great. But I think there'll be a backlash and a kind of an acceptance that actually most people are doing better just with audio on its own.
For our niche, the coaches, they really struggle to create that video content, so they need the clips.
They need to get off the rat wheel,
right?
Of
they need
constantly.
the Instagram content and TikTok and all of that. So that's the main reason. But it's not the full video, really.
No.
It's the clips,
take or leave the
right?
full video.
Exactly.
But
then, if my dad didn't even know what a podcast was.
Oh yeah,
Though
sure.
he was not listening, he was putting them on the TV, like streaming them on the TV from YouTube and just walking around the house and listening. Didn't know that it was a podcast. I told him we have a podcast production company. He was like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "No, you listen to that."
Don't worry, my mom's the same.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a totally different demographic who knows YouTube and doesn't use streaming platforms.
Yes, and so they use it.
That's funny.
They will actually watch. Like they don't even watch. They just put it. It's just a one. They're familiar with YouTube. I feel like the older generation is more familiar with YouTube than other things.
I mean, I think that's kind of it's an indictment of the kind of state of podcasting in general, isn't it? That it's just more hard to listen to, and it's a bigger barrier to listen as well.
Absolutely.
YouTube, you pull out your laptop, you watch something good on there, but like there's, I mean, that's the place where YouTube maybe has a place in podcasting.
That's
it's just
what
the
I
simple
always think.
fact
Yeah.
that it helps people find it. Because
Yeah.
how would you just listen to a podcast on a computer?
Yeah.
There's a few ways you can do it, but there's no real kind of obvious one place.
You're very right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
you
do
have to
think that
convince
that is the
your
one place where YouTube has
yeah.
is valuable.
But otherwise, you have to convince your mum or your dad or your grandpa or whatever to like buy a pair of headphones, plug them into a phone, download an app specifically for podcasting,
Yeah,
or at least show them where the podcast app is on Apple or whatever. And it's just there's a lot of barriers. That's the trouble. That's why we've always been a slow growing medium.
You're right.
As opposed to a
And I
hockey
live
stick.
far away from home. I try to explain to them that they have iPhones, that they can listen on Apple Podcasts. No.
They want to listen to our podcast, right? Like, because, you know.
Yeah, but it did
course.
not work. I don't think they figured it out.
Oh, gosh.
Never
That's
mind.
hilarious.
Next time.
Yep. Well, Colin, this is, I mean, these are all fun, but this one was particularly super, super fun. I really, I'm always surprised by how much I love doing these interviews, because we really started our podcast because we were struggling to create valuable content for people and show our expertise and spread our message, and we're just trying to focus on our business, not sit around creating content all day. And this podcast was just kind of the solution to outsourcing personal brand content. But like, we're 15 episodes in now. This is our 15th episode, so we're still like pretty new, but
Cool.
We're still
Good
smart.
work.
but we're making it work, and I really enjoy all these interviews, and I always learn a ton. I think this is a really valuable episode for anybody. Well, for people who don't know, like, Colin is a celebrity in the podcasting world. Like
Yes.
I know, Colin, I know your voice so well. I've listened to probably 50 hours. I used to have a really long drive to my parents' house from where I was living when I was going to university. And I was listening to the podcast for 2 hours every single time, back and forth. And then I actually dropped out of school because I was spending too much time working on my podcasting business and my music stuff as well.
That's my fault.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I think, you've made an awesome impact. You just attacked the world of podcasting and totally came out on as a leader, and there's also just a sense that you really love doing this. Like, it's so much not just the business, but it's also just like you're a teacher, and you want to see that your message is landing and that people are learning. And we're both, me and Selena, are great examples of that being true.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, I really, really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. And yeah, I even like 12, 13 years in, I still love the whole medium. Like, I still listen to as many podcasts. My wife sometimes has to pull the ear pods out of my ears to get me back in the real world still. So yeah, I'm just always honored to be able to help people to create more of these shows that I love. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Totally.
never thought I'd be here 10 years ago.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, life takes you wherever you're supposed to go. I guess that's how it seems with most people who do great things. So we will link everything. We won't make you say all your links and everything. Everything will be all perfectly linked in the show notes, and you can find Colin everywhere. We've also said what you do like 20 times and listed all sorts of things. But Podcraft is a awesome resource, and
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. So thank you for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
No, thank you for the invite, and good luck with the rest of the show and the company and everything. I think you guys are doing a great job so far. I'm sure it'll continue to grow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great to hear.